Welcome, welcome. We are proud to have with us today Professor Clifford THIES of Shenandoah University. He's part of our series of different professors, lawyers, academics, and politicians that we are talking to inform you, the public, about how do people who study these things feel about national divorce and where we're going in the future. Today, we are talking with Professor Clifford F. THIES. And let me give an introduction to everybody. He works at Shenandoah University. He is the Eldon R. Lindsay Professor of Economics and Finance at the university. He's been there since 1993. He studied at the University of Baltimore and the University of Montana. He's the co-author, contributor, and editor of more than 100 books and scholarly articles. He's a member of the board for the Journal of Private Enterprise and is a former Bradley Resident Scholar at the Heritage Foundation, past president of the Faculty Senate of Shenandoah University and University of Baltimore, and he's a veteran in the United States Army and Army Reserve. Today, we're going to be talking about this article that he wrote a while back. I still think it's a great one. Can states secede? In which there was 3 levels on which this question can be answered: the inalienable right of secession, national law of secession, and U.S. law, and all 3 say yes. Professor, did I get anything wrong with the introduction? Is there something more you'd like to add? Is there some accolade that people need to know about you before we start the discussion?
Okay, I was on the faculties at the University of Montana and Baltimore, and I did my studying at St. John's University and then Boston College.
Okay, excellent, excellent. I really appreciate you agreeing to be here. We wanted to talk to people who are educated and versed in this space. So today I wanted to talk to you about Marjorie Taylor Greene, the sitting Congress member, and recently she made a big amount of fuss in the news about calling for a national divorce between red and blue states. Now, her messaging was, perhaps we could say, inartful. People weren't sure if she was talking about full-blown secession or if she was just talking about the states splitting up. She seems to have entertained both conversations. How did you interpret her quote? How do you feel about the concept of national division and her claim to it recently? In your opinion, Professor?
Okay, so I think she was talking about an either-or proposition, that either the states could accept that each of them is primary in domestic policy within the state, or that there may be a necessity for reconsidering the Union. So it could be secessionist, but it could be federalist. Federalism is actually a strategic compromise. It is a way for diverse people, perhaps diverse in their national orientation, their view of themselves on a national basis. Like, are they French, or are they Komi? That's one of the republics of Russia. Or are they Americans? Now, we Americans, we don't think of being American as being a national aspect of our, we think of American as transcending national heritage, at least a lot of us do. So it doesn't bother us much. But on the other hand, we have policies such as the running of our schools, the taxes that we pay, what substances are legal. These are domestic policies, you would think. But there's a party that presumes that the federal government, so-called federal government, is in reality a national government and can pass these laws and impose them on everyone, meaning on the minority, which might be the majority in a lot of states. So this is the current tension that we're under. And by the way, this is really not left nor right, because when you look around the world and even at US history, you see that people of the left in some places are separatists or nationalists, and in other places you find people on the right are separatists or nationalists. It's basically who feels alienated from the policies of the government.
That's what I've heard. I've heard, and what I've seen is Donald Trump becomes elected, California says, let's secede. Joseph Biden becomes elected. Texas says, let's secede. Those are facts. I mean, that's literally, action and then reaction,
Right.
action and reaction. And it seems to be our side lost, so let's leave. Let's not wait for the next election. And I don't recall that was as common a sentiment. I don't recall a time or when you look at the 1970s, 1980s, 1950s, even 1990s, where a big state would say, well, we lost the presidency, let's secede. That seems to be a relatively new reactive sentiment. Do you agree? Do you think division is getting worse? One of the other questions I wanted to ask you was, when Marjorie Taylor Greene made her tweet, I saw Stephen Colbert on Nightly News and the Young Turks and Breaking Points News all say the exact same thing. There's no division in America. I don't know what she's talking about. She's making this up just for her own political game. We basically all get along with each other. Do you believe that?
Well, you would expect the rulers to say that. They want to make of the masses of people into subservient second-class citizen with no right of freedom of speech, nor even an acknowledgement that they have freedom at all. They want to say only the woke, the people like us, the elite, are free, and other people are mere avatars for their intersection of race and sex. In prior times, you would be an avatar of your class. In other countries, you would be an avatar for the colonialists or an avatar for one national, meaning ethnic group within the country or another. So, yes, those who are in the majority want to presume that everybody likes them.
Well,
and what they're proposing is really just common sense. And right, we need more humility. Now, America's had a history, first of the division of powers between the federal government and the state government. That's why our country is named the United States. Both parts are
right,
equally important. We're united and we are states. Now, once we become a mush thing, a US, us government,
right,
rather than a United States government, then we're going to possibly run into problems. Now, the fact that over the last several elections we flipped one way and the other is a saving grace. While some people might say, well, if we lose the next election, that's it for the country. The truth of the matter is it hasn't been it for the country for
right,
several generations. And America seemed to partially roll back whatever mistake they most recently made. So Obama's elected president. 2 years later, the Republicans are in the majority in the Congress. Same
right.
thing happened with Trump. How long did he have a majority in the Congress? 2 years. How long did Biden have a majority in the Congress? 2
2
years.
years.
So the Americans, in their wisdom, keep the government divided so that no one or other ideology can run rampant over us, the people.
Let me ask you another question, if I may. I just would like to get back to this. So, how did we have such incredible collective amnesia across the left and the right, and politicians and lawyers all saying there's no division? This is a survey from Center for Politics out of the University of Virginia, showing 80% of Biden voters and 84% of Trump voters feel elected officials from the other party are a clear and present danger to America. And 74% of Biden voters and 78% of Trump voters say they feel voters from the other party are a clear and present danger to America. That survey made national news. It came out 2 years ago. Everybody forgot about it.
No.
NPR in 2008 and NPR in 2022 said there's a book called The Big Sort. Americans are sorting themselves into like-minded political communities. Then we have the New York Times talks about how there's landslide voting counties and they're expanding, where don't even try to run if you're from the other party. You have no chance. If you look at these maps, you can see in 1992, half of America's gray. That means you have a 50-50 chance. Then we go to up to 2012, 2016. You can see almost all the gray's gone. You're either red or blue. That's polarization. It also matches the 2000 to 2020 presidential election maps by county. If you look at the map on the left, it shows a lot of pink. Look on the map on the right, 20 years later, it's all hard red or blue. And finally, we can see Time magazine covering how people will not even date someone outside of their political percentage point. And it grew from about a third to half in 2020. Also national news. Pew Research Center, also national news. Partisan divide has doubled while all other previous divisions in America remained the same. Also national news. Maybe we should break up by Sarah Silverman, made national news. Ron Perlman, also famous, said, I don't want to live in your world. You don't want to live in mine. Joe Biden does a speech in front of the White House or whatever with a blood red backdrop
Right.
and the jeans. How did they forget all this? How does everybody forget all this? How do they think they have the gall to say this and believe that Americans will buy it? And then why did Americans also participate in the collective amnesia? How do so many national news stories just poof? What did that happen? I don't remember. Like, how does that happen? How does
Well,
they
it
put this off?
happens because you haven't been pushing this point for long. You've jumped into this program of reminding Americans that this polarization is really bad. It rips us apart. And also refocusing on this concept of federalism. So we can have a world that is integrated in terms of our economy and in terms of social connections and so forth, um, as long as we respect national borders. That sounds like a contradiction. To a lot of people, you either have one world government or you have nationalist governments with closed borders. No, no, you can have a world of open but defined borders, controlled borders. And you look through history and you find these things. For example, the Great Wall of China. It wasn't to exclude non Chinese from China, it was to channel the interaction to identifiable places so immigration could be controlled and so that trade can be controlled and taxed or whatever. So the wall, Hadrian's Wall, in
Right.
England during the Roman era, it was not an exclusive wall. It was for the purpose of directing uh, people when they moved from one to the other side of the wall and regulating trade. So Trump made this point in 2016, and nobody remembers this, maybe not even the Donald. But he said, we need a big, beautiful wall with a golden door. And his followers
Oh,
will accept anything, and they accepted that when he said it because they trust Trump to protect this country, even though others distrust him or trust him in a negative way. Um, so that's what we need. We need this concept of well-defined countries with borders that are regulated, but which nevertheless are open. So that's the kind of strategic thinking that we're lacking. Also, tolerance. That maybe people in California don't want to be having the same domestic policies as the people in Texas or Florida, or for that matter, that people in Hungary might want different domestic policies than people in Germany or France.
right.
How could we be tolerant while still believing that actually what we believe in is the best? I mean, that's kind of how do you do that? How do you say, my view on abortion is the right view? I've thought about this, I'm sincere, and I mean well. I've prayed about this and say, but I accept that not everybody agrees with me. And maybe the majority where I live agrees with me, but not the majority across the border. Does that mean I have to invade that other place and impose my view on them? Now, if you really believe in what you say you believe in, why don't you trust that it will exhibit itself? So if we have tolerance, and then if we look at decision making at the lowest level possible as laboratories of democracy, then we can move ahead into the future and actually learn from each other. And yeah, that's the alternative to this is pretty ugly. It is war. The same survey you began a string of references included a question: do you want your leader to overrule the Congress and the Supreme Court and rule arbitrarily? It didn't use maybe those exact words. And the majority on both sides, yes, we want a strong leader. So each side wants Adolf Hitler. I mean, if you read it that way, do they really? Do
Yeah.
they really want Adolf Hitler?
You know, conservatives seemed to, right. Would it be better for America if whoever is president could take needed actions without being constrained by the Congress or the courts? 46% of Biden voters somewhat agree. 44% of Trump voters somewhat agree.
And that difference is not
Disturbing.
statistically significant. So pluralities on both sides want a strong leader, which we've had a few recently.
Yeah.
Hitler,
And
Mussolini,
we saw Trump came along, and a
Stalin.
lot of people backed him. But I would also point out to, liberals that, Joe Biden came on TV and said 78 million Americans are enemies of the state, and it scared his own party and independents. But you still had Democrats who said he was right for doing it. Right on, Joe.
Yeah,
Glad you
yeah,
got in
and
there
Joe
and you
Biden
took
was
him.
right to
You took it
say
right to him,
if
buddy.
you oppose the government of the United States, you need F-15s and nuclear bombs.
Right.
So it's
And
not
they
only Putin who's threatening the West with nuclear bombs, it's our own president. We
absolutely. And
should
you also
not
had
threaten anybody with nuclear bombs.
Eric Swalwell is a Congress member from California, and he did the exact same thing before Biden. He goes, "Oh, if anybody wants to rebel or you don't like it, we have nukes." Meaning, sitting Congress member, I will be part of dropping nukes on fellow American citizens in the process of rebellion. He was celebrated by liberals for doing that. So I see it on both sides. These are horrible actions. You shouldn't be supporting anybody who says,
Right.
I will entertain the idea of violence against my political rivals in any capacity. Those people should not be in leadership. You should not be following. And yet we see examples on both the left and the right where they do that. Backs up your
So,
point down below. We need
so
more
I think
toleration.
what we should have in common is, number one, that we will resolve our differences, whatever they are, peacefully. We will not resort to violence, and that we will live and let live. We will be tolerant of others, and we'll find the fullest extent possible that we can cooperate nevertheless. So if we each live in our own separate nation, but have free trade and allow individuals to have social connections uh, across borders, if we allow travel and so forth, and especially if we allow freedom of speech so that people can advocate for changing views. So that's the difference. In terms of, we should have the right party win the next election and then rule by autocratic rule and rule by force using nuclear weapons if we have to subjugate the minority. No, no. So we used to call this liberalism. So I do believe that in the 19th century, when we talk about classical liberals in England and
Right.
elsewhere, and
Right.
earlier in this country's history, liberalism started to change. It started to mean more than just for advocating for freedom. It meant having a heart for the disadvantaged, so that you want social mobility for uh, those below the average. Um, And now what does it mean? Actually, the word liberal is kind of obsolete in this country. We have progressives versus conservatives. And what does conservative mean? Well, that used to mean being for monarchy, and that has evolved
Yeah, when you
to
go way back, yeah.
yeah, and that has
Back.
evolved so that today it means I don't know. I think the right has to figure this out. So the left has figured it out. It's progressive socialism, and the right is sort of torn between, does conservatism today mean liberalism, or does it mean that we get to rule and impose our social views on others?
Well, let me ask you. So, two questions. One is, well, we'll go with this one. Let's say federalism is the solution to the division in America. Seems like that's what you're suggesting, Professor. I also talked to Chuck DeVore, the Texas Policy Solution and Center, and he said the same thing. We don't, the way to deal with this division is more federalism, more rights passed down to the states so that people don't feel pressured. So if Biden wins, Texas isn't worried because they're not like, oh, now we're going to have to deal with all these laws pushed on us. Or if Newsom becomes president, you can be sure people in red states would freak out. But if there was more federalism, they would go, well, he's going to try to tweak things, but he can't tell us what to do. And it would calm things down. My question is, let's assume all that's true. I want to take you back 9 months to maybe when they repealed something called Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court level. And I was shocked because I had seen for decades, conservatives, Republicans, whatever you want to call them, we are about federalism, power to the states. Okay, well, the Supreme Court kicked it back to the states. In response, Mike Pence, the vice president, immediately said, not good enough. Let's force all the liberal states to start banning abortion. And he was backed up by Republicans. Liberals did not interpret this ruling as power back to the states. I was here in California. Almost nobody understood, and I mean almost nobody understood that this was, they're not taking away our rights. It's coming back to California. California's never going to vote against the right of a woman to choose her body. So we're good. The way it's interpreted in California was they're going to take away the right again for everybody. I mean, they literally saw this thing as you took away a federal protection, so therefore you took away our state protection. So basically nobody on the left backed it up. And then you had the right contradicting 5 decades of policy. What chance do we have for federalism to come to America, given that we basically just both sides kind of trashed it last year?
Right. So this polarization didn't come from no place. It came from a series of mistakes, tactical as well as strategic, by both parties. Both parties are raptured by their extreme wings. That's the source of their volunteers and their money. And so, how do we handle this? This is real tough for us, given our political system. So, in a European style parliamentary government, what you would like is, even though the right and the left might have large minorities, that liberals of various types, market liberals or center right liberals on one side or social liberals on the other, have the balance. Now, this is not the answer either. You see, in Israel, where they have parliamentary style, the people who have the balance are extremists of the religious right. So
Right.
maybe there is no real easy solution, or at least I haven't figured it out. Maybe the solution is some entrepreneurial politician, enters the scene. Well, didn't the mayor of New York City, Bloomberg, attempt that and spend $1 billion in the Democratic primary and went nowhere?
Right.
Went nowhere.
Right.
So I thought Bloomberg was perfectly positioned to be a centrist alternative to the extremists that have excess influence on our two major parties. So this is a tough one.
I don't. Do you see? Because I think Roe v. Wade and the way it was handled was a loss for federalism at the national level. I could be wrong. Do you see
Right.
people embracing federalism? I mean, do you see something on the horizon where people on the left are going to start to get it and where people on the right are going to start to understand, hey, when we get more powers back to the states, don't immediately then and go say, let's take away those freedoms from the states and force our own views on this. That's what the liberals do. Do you see
Let's
anything like
yes,
that kind of
let's talk
awareness
about
coming?
Roe v. Wade and how that might have turned out differently. Uh,
Sure.
in the mid 20th century, the Supreme Court was grappling with discrimination in schooling. And so we had the Supreme Court wait until they had a 9-0 decision uh, before having a decision. And is that the case with the overturning of Roe v. Wade? No, it was 6-3. So it had a substantial majority. It wasn't a knife edge 5-4 decision, but it would have been better if there was some kind of attempt at consensus. I think with the Roe v. Wade, a real mess up was made in immediately reviving all state laws. When most of those laws, as you just mentioned, had been dormant for years. Only a few of the states had changed the laws, and then under the influence of the extremes on political parties, of the political parties. So maybe the Supreme Court could have said, for better or for worse, this is where we are, uh,
Right.
but states now have the right to change from where we are, through their own legislative process. So it obviously didn't work out very well. The Republicans lost the elections in 2020, I think, because of Roe v. Wade. Of course, it was a relatively close election, and you could just about point to anything as the reason. Um,
Fair.
yeah, and
That's
Mike
very
Pence wants to make sure we lose the next election, even badly,
no
by
comment.
positioning himself within the Republican Party to pick up the religious vote, a very important vote in the primary process in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
So yes, it's this is I don't know. I don't think there's if there was an easy answer, someone would have figured it out by now.
Well, one of the things that I see a lot is people saying, well, uh, what? Oh, I lost my train of thought there for a second. Sorry. I see people saying, it'll just get better. We've had divisions in America before. We've gotten over them. The 1960s, the period after the Civil
Right,
War,
right.
the
Yes.
1930s. To which I say, yeah, I don't think that's exactly the same. I mean,
Right.
well, let me give my analysis and you tell me if I'm getting this wrong. And if I'm getting it wrong,
Yeah.
please just level me out. I want the public to be informed. We do this so that the people get the facts and the resources directly. But I've heard a lot of, hey, things were so polarized in the 1960s and we got together. So you don't need to worry about this new round of polarization. To which I responded, well, that's fundamentally different because in the 1960s, you had people who were pro Vietnam War or anti Vietnam War, and they would live in the same household and city and state. And the division was within each family, spread evenly across America. Now we have, if I'm for the Vietnam War, I move to a totally different state. And if I'm against the Vietnam War, I up and left my family and moved to another state. And they go, that's a geographic separation that did not exist during the 1960s woke period. You didn't have the hippies and every family disintegrating at once. And then, I mean, some people did go to California, but not everybody. So I thought there's a geographic dispersion that we're seeing now that was not existed in the 1960s. And so I think this is worse because the Civil War was to populations that were geographically dispersed. We seem to be going back to that. That's a different metric than the 1960s. What are your thoughts and feelings, Professor?
Yes. So in a sense, we resolved these differences in the past, but as you mentioned, at what cost? And at the end, you mentioned the Civil War. That's not how you want to resolve differences. So you want to resolve them through incremental compromise, or strategic compromises, things that will lead you. So this is what Abraham Lincoln was saying when he was a candidate. And before that, when he was in the Whig Party, he was saying, stop the spread of slavery uh, to the territories. And the South saw that as that would be the eventual end of slavery. Well, yeah, actually, that was the plan. But through peaceful means rather than a civil war. Hopefully, at some point along this route, there would have been maybe gradual emancipation or compensated emancipation, the way that the British Commonwealth ended slavery. So
Exactly.
we could do this better than having a civil war. Now, what about today as we come forward to today? We have this extreme level of polarization, each party seeming to be captured by its more extremist elements. You see this in voting and primaries within each party. It tends to be that the more extreme candidate wins at the primary level. California attempted to address this with the top two voting
Right.
method, thinking that we could have competition within parties. Alaska's trying the top four with uh, ranked choice voting in the second round. Um, the losers, first of all, the Republican Party has yet to figure this one out. In the Republican Party for Congress, both Republican candidates said to their supporters, don't vote for my Republican opponent as a second choice.
Right.
Vote for the
Right.
Democrat. Well,
Yeah.
that's not very strategic thinking. So the
No,
idea is
no,
that
it's not.
the idea with strategic with ranked choice voting should be that the candidate who could appeal to a lot of people, maybe moderately, um, could win in the runoff, rather than the extreme candidate win the primary and then goes against another extreme candidate in the full election.
Right.
We've seen this in Latin America. I don't know if you follow Latin American
Yep.
politics, but in one after another country where they have runoff elections, it's the more extreme candidate on the right facing the more extreme candidate on the left. And often you find that the voters in these countries, in their wisdom, they vote in a center right majority in their parliament and vote in a left socialist for their president. So people turns out to be pretty smart. They'll figure this out. I think that Alaska's system will right itself. Maybe it'll take some time for the Republicans to figure this out. Their real enemy is the left Democrat, not the other Republican. But these are just, I think, efforts to deal with the polarization that we have, and these efforts are none of them show themselves to be, the magic answer.
That's another question I was going to ask you. So Marjorie Taylor Greene says, hey, the polarization's pretty bad. Let's have a national divorce before it gets worse. The response is two things. One, she's crazy. There's nothing like that. And then the other one is, well, let's just implement federalism. And the third response was, and this was covered widely, we don't need a national divorce. We just need marriage counseling. I believe it was the governor of Utah said that. And my question to you, Professor, is the same question I've asked everybody. So the president is the highest ranking official in America, the soul of the nation, right? We're told. Joe Biden ran on a campaign of bringing America back together. He was the decent president that was going to reestablish order, bring everybody together. He promised a, quote, period of national calming, and the Republicans would learn their lesson and everybody would come back together. Well, that was before January 6th. He said that. And this is 2 years later, and we're having Marjorie Taylor Greene talk about national division. If the president outright failed at being a marriage counselor, who else can be the marriage counselor for the entire nation of America?
So I think we're going to have an election in 2024, and we might see if somebody can don the mantle of a leadership. And that means more than just simply winning knife-edge majority votes in Congress, but rather changing the mood of the country from this paralyzing negativity underlying the polarization to a positive and optimistic view of the future. So, you think of the two greatest political leaders of the 20th century, and they were FDR and Ronald Reagan. They very much differed in their policy prescriptions, but they both brought leadership, to the fore. Now, yeah, we could say in the Cold War, we had something to unite us, namely a common enemy. And we're adrift now that we don't have a common enemy, so we make enemies of ourselves. No, that should not be the way it is. We should be looking to the future with optimism and have some confidence that however we resolve current differences, we're going to have a better future.
If there is not a presidential candidate who pops up in 2 years and gets, let's say, 65% of the vote, showing that the country's united against them and has a message of equal respect for Republicans and Democrats, right? They come in, I respect you both. I see you all as Americans. Like Obama said, like George W. Bush said, even though they were political, their speeches tended to be for all the people. And, if you go back to Clinton, I think he had about 65%, maybe Reagan, not these knife edge minorities like, what was it? George W. Bush won with 51% and said, I had a mandate. And then every president after him said, I got 51%. That's a mandate. No, that's you barely winning. So they just scrapped 60%. So you're talking about going back to elections, the likes of which we haven't seen since before W. Bush, maybe 20 years ago, and a candidate who's able to talk like Bush or Obama, something we haven't seen in 10 years. And this person needs to pop up in the next 2 years. Do you have anybody in mind who could pull that off? Anybody at all at the national stage?
So we do have a governor in Florida who was reelected with 60% of the vote in that one state.
Yes.
Now, could he do such a thing?
They hate his guts in blue states.
Yes, could. So I think it's going to require, first of all, getting a nomination, which is a trick.
Sure.
How do you do this? With the crocodiles that are out there for anybody who says anything moderate. Then you have to get legislation through Congress, which is another trick. And then that legislation has to work and propel the country to a better place, before you're running for reelection. Now, that's where Reagan and Obama differentiated. In other words, Obama actually had very positive rhetoric. He was inspirational, not only to America, but worldwide. And we look back at his presidency with a lot of respect. He's a very highly well thought of former president at this time. So he left office with very high approval ratings, even though he was reelected by a relatively small majority. So yeah, these are someone who could do all these things is a real master. Let me say something positive about Trump.
Sure.
Trump broke the mold of racial politics in this country. The guy has such an overwhelming personality. He cuts through rhetoric and he touches people. Of course, he's a celebrity president, and has that kind of charm. And I think the Republicans could acknowledge. I've never seen a Republican candidate actively campaign for minority votes before I saw Trump, and now you just expect that. So this
not
is
since
great.
W. Bush.
No. Now I remember, this is going back. I'm an older fella. I remember a Republican vice president say, "You seen one ghetto, you seen them all." That was Spiro Agnew.
True.
It was just true. That was just absolutely terrible. Even if you don't view the vote, the effect on the vote to be significant, you should, as a Republican, campaign in minority districts for the good of the country.
I agree, but
Trump brought that in.
He may have done that, and that might be completely 100% fact. But the perception of 80% of the minorities in America is that the guy's a white supremacist. So even if he did that, and even if he did
Yeah.
everything right, the perception is amongst 80% of minorities, this guy's a hardcore white supremacist. He's just missing the hood. So, I mean, and then if we look at, and he kind of preached to a more extreme vibe a little bit to get attention. I remember the famous Mexico, since they're rapists, are you going to apologize? No, but I'll eat a taco salad the next day, which he knew was going to upset liberals. And then we have Joe Biden. But I'm saying also on the left, we have Joe Biden. And Joe Biden was pushed to make that speech calling out 78 million Americans as enemies of the state by fellow Democrats. That wasn't his idea. He initially came in as more moderate. Let's work with the Republicans. He got slammed by liberals and Democrats for talking about how I could talk to Republicans back in the day. Oh, those are racists. Why are you trying to reach out to these people? You need to call them out. They're enemies of the state. And they pushed him to that degree. The other major candidate on the left was Bernie Sanders, as firebrand as it gets. The other person is, who you look, AOC. And then if you look at on the right, Ron DeSantis. Now, Ron DeSantis has a huge following in Florida, and Florida does have some liberals, but the guy, again, fact versus perception. The perception is 80% of liberals in America view Ron DeSantis as a guy who hates gay people. Whether that's true or not, that is the perception. And so what we see is we had W. Bush, who he was polarizing, but he at least tried to give speeches like he was for all Americans. Obama comes, he's trying to give speeches like he's for all Americans. And then Trump, that language is gone. Biden, that language is gone. So now we're going over 6 years of polarizing talk for both sides after a period of presidents who tried to reach out for everybody. What faith or hope should we have that speaking for everybody is going to come back into vogue again, since the trajectory seems to be the total opposite over the last 6 years?
Right, right. So I see the positive on the Republican side. The door to that was opened by Trump. His appeal to minority voters was a product of his own self-image. The guy has a bloated image of himself. He believed he could do anything. He believed he could win the black vote. He said that multiple times.
I remember that.
Right, right. So he was sort of the first to land on the beach, and he never made it inland. But the follow-on Republicans have this opportunity, especially with Hispanic voters, but with other minorities as well. The Black Americans have loyalty as a very strong virtue. It is a virtue, so it's pulling teeth to get incremental change with the African Americans. But that's important too. But you're just not going to make any breakthrough with that community until you do have a breakthrough.
Right.
Now,
right.
The other side of the coin concerns the breaking up of America by the city versus the rural divide. And the suburbs seem to be where the battleground is, the no man's land. Now, I don't know what to do about that, but this is, I'm a city boy. I am a tough guy. The times that I traveled in rural areas, I thought these people were naive. They were so friendly and trusting of others. I thought these people are just going to get ripped off. I've now living in a rural or exurb of Virginia for the last 30 years. I've kind of, I don't know, maybe become one of them myself.
There you go. There you go.
But I still follow the Yankees.
That's fine. But this is the story of my stepdad. My stepdad voted for Trump because of financial reasons. He liked his tax policy. But he's also married to my mom, who's Mexican. And he has been forced by my mom to help like 7 or 8 different people who came in undocumented legally get their immigration paperwork. And he doesn't like California laws and he hates the woke culture, but all of his daughters and family and friends and everybody and businesses are here. So he might complain, but he's going nowhere, right? He's just going to have to deal with it. This is what I talk about with Orange County. People think Orange County is still conservative, San Diego. No, they're not. They're majority liberal. There's still a hardcore conservative base there, but they're just going to have to deal with it, and they're not leaving. They don't like the politics, but when your family and your business is here, it's a little bit difficult to just up and leave if those things are important to you. So I think a lot of the conservatives here stuck in liberal areas are not going anywhere. I kind of view the same thing as maybe in Texas, to which point I get is, why can't we separate rural from urban areas? If you look at Georgia, the majority of the blue vote comes from Atlanta. Atlanta is 1/5 of the total landmass of Georgia. If you look at Illinois, the majority of the blue vote comes from just Chicago. Chicago is about 1/9 of the landmass. And they're at the extreme ends of the state, right? So here's the state, and the liberal portion is all like right here. Look at Oregon, Washington, same thing. It's on the coast. Look at Texas. I was just talking to Chuck DeVore of the Texas Policy Solution, and I said, isn't 80% of the liberal vote coming from something called the Urban Triangle? Houston down to up to Dallas and then down to San Antonio. It's literally a triangle. That triangle between those three metro areas represents 80% of the liberals and is 1/9 of the total landmass of Texas. Given that 30 states in America, more states than we're not, were broken off from a previous larger state or larger body, why is this undoable? We have more states in America broken off from a larger chunk of territory than formed any other way. We have multiple states where it is not multiple little urban communities spread in between a rural outland. It's one gigantic urban metro community dominating 90% of the rest of the landmass. And you could easily draw a line between the two of them, which is literally what happened in 30 other states. I remember Ohio, Michigan. They fought a war where they shot at each other. A lot of people don't remember this because they wanted, I think it was the farmers in Ohio said, we want our own water. And we noticed that when we're part of your Michigan government or something, we don't get the rights that we think.
They were fighting over Toledo.
What?
They were fighting over Toledo.
Yes. Right.
Today,
yeah.
I think if they had a war over Toledo, it would be to shove it to the other state.
Well, maybe now, but we can see where Americans have said more often than not, hey, it was cool living with you for a while. Now we're too big. We kind of think we'd be more comfortable doing our own thing over here. There's literally 30 states made that way, only 20 states not. That's the majority of America. A lot of these states, and they're looking at Atlanta and Georgia and going, how could we possibly split? And I'm going, you cut off the metro area from 90% of the landmass, and you do a split roughly there, like we've done 30 times before in American history.
There's a real bad problem our country has for its cities. We have, by reason of our setup, I don't know that there's a theory behind it, but there's just hundreds of years of history now behind it. We have two major parties. So one of those parties is dominant in the cities and the other is dominant in the country. We don't have competition within many of our jurisdictions. You showed a map. At the local jurisdiction level, we have one party system in most of America.
Right.
Now, in a place like Germany, with their system, they have multiple parties competing with each other to govern, let's say, the city-state of Berlin or the city-state of Hamburg. And even if all those parties are to the left of the center of the country, nevertheless, they provide competition with each other. Now, we don't have that in America. We have mono-party governments. So we don't really, when we look at countries of the world and we don't find that the party out of power has a reasonable chance ever of winning the next election, we don't think of that as a democracy. We think of that as a one-party state. Maybe it's a kind of democracy, but it's not a real functioning democracy. So one of the problems we have, given our unique system, our so-called two-party system, is that our cities And many of our rural areas have one-party government, and that's not good.
Certainly the way here in California.
Right. Now, you
And
could say we'll have the runoff elections. No, political parties give infrastructure to their candidates. Political parties are a social institution, which are very important. Uh, Individual candidates are not the same thing as competing parties at the local level. So if I were in Poland and I was in a rural area, I might vote for the Populist Party or the People's Party, a rural agrarian party,
right.
or I might vote for the National Conservative Party, the
Sure.
party that's ruling at the
Sure.
national level, or I might vote for the Civic Democrats, which is kind of a market liberal party. But in any case, in the rural area, I'd have these choices, meaningful choices. In an urban area,
Absolutely.
maybe I'm looking at the Social Democrats there. Although they're a small party nationwide, they might have good appeal to people in the urban areas. So we need not a third party or independent candidates. We need like 5 or 6 parties.
I completely agree. How likely is that given this fact? So when America invaded Iraq, and then when they invaded Afghanistan, early 2005, 2008, and they go, we're going to set up these countries as democracies. One of the things they did was they set up the style of democracy you're talking about. Multiple
Right.
parties. The parties have to come together and form a coalition government. And I remember there was a debate here in America going, well, why are you doing that? That's not how we do it in America. And they kind of had to admit that 95% of the Earth's democracies do not do it like America, and they view the American system as whack job crazy. In fact, they call it the American style of winner take all, and they
Right,
absolutely
right.
refuse to have their government. And I mean France, Japan, South Korea, Germany, England, all of our major out. Nobody does it the way that we do. They look at this as crazy. And we don't even implement it in other countries that we invade and say, you need to implement democracy. That's going
So
back
Iraq
10 years
didn't turn
ago.
out well, but our effort to restructure Germany and Japan after World War II as a democratic country did work out. Now, why
Sure.
didn't it work out in Iraq when it worked out in Germany and Japan? Well, you can mention a variety of things, but one of the things is that Germany had a national identity. Same thing in Japan. Whereas in Iraq, you had the Sunni versus Shia, and then there's other mixes in there. Really strong ethnic divides. That place should have been broken into a federal system of several
I agree.
countries so that within each of those countries, you could have had a political spectrum emerge. So these are the left of center Sunnis. Those are the right of center Sunnis. And maybe over time they'd learn, hey, our left of center Sunnis have some things in common with left of center Shia and
Sure.
left of center Kurds. And
Sure.
then we get that working. But the idea of forming a nation out of a group of people who have different national identities, or we might think ethnic identities,
Sure.
is a real tough one to pull off. Um, we see in Belgium, uh, it has been a constant struggle,
The
for,
Walloons and the
right,
Flemish.
between the Walloons and the other ones.
Flemish?
The Flemish, right. So, and I forget which is the Dutch speaker and which are
I
the
forget
French
too.
speaker.
Yeah.
So for a long time, they had an understanding whoever forms the government has to have majorities from both of the language groups or national
Yeah.
groups. But recently,
Right.
no, that rule was broken, and the center-right parties, uh, which dominated in the Dutch part, have only a minority in their coalition of center-right politicians from the French part, and it seems to be working. But this is the thing about the EU, that model, a supranational federalism overlaid on national governments, is that you can get trade and national and military alliances. Now, whether they work or not is another thing.
Sure.
While respecting these national or language or ethnic groupings of people. So
I,
that was the problem of Iraq.
yeah,
There's too many
totally,
different
totally.
kinds
Yeah,
of people.
absolutely. I agree with that analysis. My question was that we got into Iraq, Afghanistan, maybe 10 years ago, nation building. It's been about a decade where Americans have been aware that even when we invade another country, we don't set up democracies like our own. So it's been about a decade where Americans have had to deal with the reality that most of the world's democracies reject our system, don't have anything like it. And yet we've been resistant to change. We've been resistant to even allowing a third party or having parliamentary system. How realistic is it to believe that we're going to have that system of government when the entire rest of the world has it, and we've been totally fine ignoring them for over a decade?
Right. And where the runoff voting in Maine and in Alaska doesn't seem to work so well, at least the way some people see it.
They did
So,
try.
right, we're going to
Made
need
for
to
effort.
see some of these reforms, you know, stick and function well, where people start to say, we have something here that is working, and for that to pass around. So the Irish system of what's called ranked choice works well in Ireland and in Australia's Senate. And I don't know if it works well anyplace else, but California, excuse me, Alaska is trying to mimic that, and Maine's trying to mimic that. Runoff elections don't work. We've had too many problems of the runoff involving extremes from each side. So in France, this would be, Le Pen could, either the current Le Pen Marine or her father,
Right.
they could make the runoff, in which case whoever is opposing them is a landslide. It's not a very meaningful result.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair.
And then we see in Peru, we've had, well, it was described as cancer or Alzheimer's disease choice. we go with the cancer, or we could go with the Alzheimer's
Yeah,
disease.
I kind of felt we had that here in 2020.
Right. Literally here.
Just my 2 cents on the take. Do
Right.
you want a guy who knows nothing about government or a guy who's forgotten everything about government?
So we're gonna, we don't like runoff. Runoff. What we want is something whereby people who appeal, even mildly, to the as a second choice of people eliminated in the first round. And Alaska's trying that, and we'll see how far they go.
Let me ask you, this is one of the pivotal questions I wanted to ask. So recently, over the last year, there was a CIA analyst, Barbara F. Walter, and she's been making a lot of noise in the last year saying, hey, I do analyses for the CIA, where I tell the CIA this country is about to break up into civil war before it happens, so they know what to do. I've been doing this for decades. I'm really good at it. And we have a whole metric set up. And basically, America's really damn close to the point that we have seen other countries right before they break up. If a democracy is weak, failing, or new versus a full democracy or full autocracy, a country is more likely to face civil war, she said. The second factor was whether the citizens of these partial democracies had organized themselves politically around an identity. So rather than having political parties, they were based on particular ideas, principles versus liberals. A country with these two factors of anocracy and factionalism are at a 4% chance of civil war, she said. That seems low, but actually it's not low. It means that every year those features continue to exist in a particular country, it goes up by 4%. Yeah. So United States is rising at a rapidly quick rate, and basically it could come here, and she's giving warning signs. So my question to you is political division getting so bad in America where this isn't a crazy hypothesis? And wrapped in that, if you could respond, if we don't implement federalism like you're talking about, Is this where we're going? Is there another alternative to stopping division other than federalism? Because I don't see it.
So the concept of the Republican Party as a white supremacist party fits in line with having an identity, usually ethnic or national identity.
That's what she said.
So that's what the other side is viewing the Republican Party. Yet when
Right.
I look at the Republican Party, I see a party that is increasingly invigorated by especially Hispanics, but by other minorities as well. So
There was the Texas election. I'll give you that.
yeah,
The Latina that went Republican in Texas, and the Democrats were so mad that Nancy Pelosi pushed her daughter out of the way in a photograph. It was disgusting. It was truly disgusting. It was because
we have great candidates here in Virginia, and I have opportunity to meet many of these candidates who are from various minorities, and currently are 3 statewide elected state office holders: governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. 1 white, 1 black, 1 Hispanic, and they were all nominated in the same primary process. They didn't run as a ticket. Each was nominated on their own. We had a strong candidate in what we call the 10th congressional district here, Vietnamese American. So, yeah, this gives me hope for the country's future, that the Republican Party embraces the future of the country. It's not so currently is the case in California and Florida and a number of other states, that there is no majority group any longer in America.
True.
The whites are merely the largest minority. And that's going to be true of the country as a whole pretty soon. So, look, America is a different country. That we're talking about how America is different in some negative kind of way, the structure of our elections. Let's say something positive about America. America, anybody can be American. American is where you choose to be an American. So yeah, you could be born Japanese, but it's hard to choose to be Japanese if you're not born Japanese. So that's not this country. Our country has a vibrant culture. It's constantly changing. Our immigrants and our domestic minorities are bringing new things to the scene. And not only do we meld this all together, we mix it all up too and come out with something really wonderful. So, I like that about this country. And so we have some challenges, we have some strengths.
So you don't view the Republican Party as a party that's wrapped up its identity amongst disenfranchised white people, it sounds like. Would you say that, let's just start off the basics, is division in America getting worse or better over the last 5 years at a political level, in your opinion?
I think the ideological division is strong. So on that part of it, I agree with the analyst.
Okay.
But in terms of having identity mixed in, usually racial or national identity or language identity, no.
Okay. So political identity, polarized, but maybe not an ethnic identity the way the Barbara Walters and others are, I think.
That's what they're fearing, I think.
Yeah, I talked to, I'm drawing a blank. I talked to a couple other professors of international policy, and they all said the same thing, that things are hot right now, but they might not be at the level of heat it takes to boil off in the ethnic conflicts they've seen in other countries. Right, so we may not be there. And that adds with what you're saying.
So you need to be able to identify who's on your team when it comes to something like war, right? So the Ukrainians wear yellow.
Right.
The Russians wear red because they look so much like each other.
Right.
So the idea of a race war in the United States, the talk of a race war was pretty strong.
Fair enough. But when we looked at the surveys that I was showing you on division, it is political. It shows our racial differences have kind of maintained, and our political differences are like.
I'm also going to say this. I'm okay with the United States evolving into a social democratic country. Sure. Germany's not a bad place to live, and they're basically a social democratic country.
Thank you.
I would prefer us to be more on the free market side. But as long as that's the debate, whether we're going to be in that spectrum between social democrat and market liberal or market conservative, I'm okay with that.
If there's not a presidential candidate who can get a majority of the vote and talk to Americans as one whole thing, and if federalism is not implemented, do you see political division in America definitely getting worse?
Yes, I think that we're going to see a conference of the states and drawing up of articles of disunion.
When do you think that might happen?
Oh, so first of all, 2024 is significant. Um, Second, you don't have to win the presidency. You just have to win one of the houses of Congress to
Right.
have a stake in to have a hope in the next time around, and even 2026. Maybe if
Right.
one party were to achieve hegemonic control of the government for 2 years, the fact that you have 2026 could be a reversal. But if you have hegemonic control of the country and that is maintained through 2026, and if the majority in the court system is shifted over to be part of that hegemonic control, then I think you will see a convention of the states.
That was brilliant. Thank you for doing that. I've been asking this question, and it's hard to get people to actually attempt to predict the scenarios in the future that would lead to even more division. I think it's because they don't want to think about it. I think they want to think, let's only talk about how to make it better, and let's only believe that it's going to get better, instead of going, okay, well, hopefully it does, but shouldn't we also be aware that it could get worse and start to identify steps to notice as it gets worse? I don't see many people being willing to engage in that conversation, and I find that
Now, let me comment on
dangerous.
some of these states that have divisions within the state. I don't know
Sure.
why the people of Eastern Oregon don't just simply declare independence and then negotiate for admission as a new state.
Well, that's exactly what I was talking
They have
about.
this confused with let's become part of Idaho. That's not how these things happen.
Exactly. So, here's Oregon. You can see the blue in the top left corner. The entire rest of the state's red. Here's Illinois, a little bit of blue in the top right corner. The entire rest of the state's red. There's Texas with the three big bubbles at the urban triangle. The rest of the state's red. Same thing with Georgia. That giant blue spot is Atlanta. The rest of the state is red. I agree with you. There seems to be divisions from one, not in every state. Some are more
No, no,
mixture. It's going to be harder.
there are issues of whether you're sufficient size to be a self-governing state,
Of
but
course.
we have mega states. California could be cut into like 8 viable states in terms of the size of the population and their economy. And Oregon could be split into 2 easily. Same thing with Washington and Illinois.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I want to ask you one last question, if I may, directly related to the essay. And it was about this specific section here. How do the states consent to secession?
Right.
The wide-ranging discussion in the court in Texas versus White contains a lot of intriguing and obtuse statements. For example, how do the states give consent to secession of a state? The Constitution, as the court says, does not envision such a thing, nor does it provide a process. However, it doesn't block. What if the legislatures of the states sent delegates to a convention that drafted the Constitution, and those states ratified it? For those who were not homeschooled, it may be necessary to point out that this was the process through which the Constitution of 1979 was created. The thing that I really found intriguing was this. While the Constitution in 1789 required the secession of 9 out of 13 states to become ratified, does this mean that the supermajority states would be necessary for consent? So if they didn't have to have all 13 states to make the original America, then why would consent to the states, if a state wanted to leave, have to mean everybody? You didn't have to have everybody to say, we have a constitution. You had 9 out of 13. That's a majority, but that's not everybody. So why can't we apply the same thing in the future? Say consent to the states means a majority, but it doesn't have to mean everybody in America agrees. Is that roughly what you're saying?
Right. So I do think it has to be at least a majority. Does it have to be a supermajority, and what size? Two-thirds or three-fourths? Just because in the original it was a supermajority, I'm not sure it has to be that way. Uh, should there be another occasion? Now, you do want to have some bargaining power. So it would be nice for you to have like a whole set of states from the Gulf Coast all the way up to the Canada border so that you can negotiate with the other parts of the country for things
Right.
like being able to fly over or otherwise transport across that expanse of land so that, because otherwise they'd have to fly from New York City to Los Angeles over the North Pole or something.
Right.
So,
Right.
as long as we do this on a fair basis and figure things, here's another thing.
Please.
So, through the Cold War, we needed to defend ourselves from the Soviet Union. Okay. And
Right.
before that, it was Germany. And before that was Germany again. During the 19th century, who knows? We were still trying to fulfill our manifest destiny and
Thank you for
expand
saying
to the Pacific. So we're not threatened by anybody. Canada, Mexico, they're not about to invade us. We don't have this impetus of being large enough to defend ourselves from any enemy. Now, Taiwan might have a problem, and Ukraine might have a problem if we're not one giant, enormous superpower, but we're not going to have a problem. So the lack of a common enemy gives us some prerogatives about how close do we have to be with each other. And maybe we could be like Europe. Maybe we could have 50 members of the UN and we could send 50 teams to the next Olympics. How come Europe gets to send 28?
That's what that's one thing I had seen was people were going, oh, if states break off, it makes America weaker automatically. And I go, is that true? There's this country called England and Canada and Australia. And we seem to have this kind of English speaking alliance at the international level and international agreements, climate change agreements, economic agreements, trade agreements, and especially in the UN. And it seems like whenever America wants to say something that's not popular, well, guess who out of all 210 countries almost always come running to back them up? Australia, Canada, England, the other English speaking countries. And I said, isn't that a benefit to America that when it wants to say something on the world stage, it automatically has friends and allies? Imagine if all those countries, all English speaking countries, were part of one nation somehow, all
Yeah.
still under the Queen. We'd never be able to go to the UN or on the international stage and have multiple voices. We'd only have one. We
Right.
English speakers think this. Does anyone else back their plan? Nobody at all. Okay, voted down. But because we have multiple other English speaking countries, war on terror, backing up the banks in 2008, backing up the banks in 2023, climate change, speaking out about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I constantly see this English League coming together again and again. If that's the case, wouldn't we have more power on the international stage with more independent English speaking nations?
So I think we would like to have a supermajority rule for this league of English speaking nations, and we'd have to figure out how do we wedge India in there since it
Right.
outweighs all the other English speaking countries added together. But maybe if they did the same thing and they didn't have one vote that overwhelmed all the others, that maybe they can give a proportionate vote to each of their states, and then we could have would be truly awesome. Who would ever bet if we had a viable mutual defense agreement
Right.
among us? Okay, nobody would ever attack us. Now, would we ever attack them if we didn't have a nation state? If we just had so many separate nations, would we get some kind of a grandiose leader, like say coming up and well, I'll just use Tennessee, just a place at
Right.
random with this world vision. I'm going to meld all these English speaking nations into one, and then we're going to seek Lebensraums from someplace.
Right.
So it
Always
seems to
goes
be
to a good place.
a protection from megalomaniacs as well.
I agree, and I just the thing I saw was America divided. There's no possible benefits, and I said, well, if there was a couple more English speaking nations, I think you could have more support on the international stage, more people backing up America, and maybe the fact is that England is separate from America, so England is able to tie their economy more to Europe. America is separate from England, so we can tie our economy more to Latin America. Australia is separate from those two, so it can tie its economy more to Asia, New Zealand, et cetera, Canada, et cetera. So because there's these different countries and they're independent, they're able to focus their economy on attaching itself to another major economic
Well,
region.
now you mentioned Latin America. If we weren't a hegemonic uh, sole superpower in the world, I think we'd have much more friendly relations with the countries of Latin America. So you take Brazil and Argentina, even Venezuela. One of the reasons they object to us, they don't want us to dominate the hemisphere. So if we were 50 different countries, the OAS would be, I think, a lot more cooperative, and we'd have a guarantee of a peaceful resolution of differences and securing human rights in the hemisphere. These countries, they share our culture. That, yeah, we're talking Protestant versus Catholic. We have a lot of Catholics within the U.S. So these things shape people's personality. We abide by what is common to the Western Christianity. That's a lot more than what divides us. And we would but the history of our country is we've dominated the hemisphere, and the Latin republics
Thank you.
look at us as interventionist and neocolonialists.
Thank you. The one, I think America's invaded every single country in Latin America except for one, which is Costa Rica. And Costa Rica is now the #1 destination for American corporate investment because of its stability, political
It's also
stability. What
popular
an
on
incredible,
spring break.
ironic chance. You destabilize the entire continent,
Oh, but
find that's not good for your money, and then you put your money in the country, it's the one country you didn't screw up. Who could have foreseen? Who could have foreseen?
So Barbara and I, my wife and I, were looking at possible retirement homes, and yeah, one of the places was Costa Rica, because well, there are lots of reasons we can go into that, but yeah, we like we practice our Spanish.
Hey, very good. I have used your brain a lot. You have been exceptionally patient. If there's anybody you can recommend, if there's anybody you can mention this to, we're trying to have intelligent discussions about national divorce from all perspectives. Hell no, I hate secession. No, we should not break up. Or maybe we should. What I find is the media is just saying, don't discuss this, period, go away, go home, and keep watching football or Netflix. And I go, that's not democracy. So we're supposed to be a Western nation. That means we're supposed to discuss ideas. Now, if we don't like this idea, fine. But I don't even see us having a base level of intelligent discussion about this. It's just, this is stupid, go away. That's how China and Russia solve problems, and it doesn't work out well for their long-term stability. Let's be a little bit better. If you can recommend anybody who you think might be willing to be part of this conversation, I would deeply appreciate it personally.
I'll pass it along by email.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything you'd like to leave the viewers with? Or my favorite question I always like to ask guests, is there a thought you want to put in people's minds that they can't get rid of for the next week, where they're going to go, you paid a little bit of attention here and there, it was in and out, but that professor at the end said X.
Oh, okay. So here's my thought for the day.
Thinking about it.
If you think something bad about America, try to think of something good about America too.
That was excellent. That was excellent. Okay. Any other comments?
No, we're going to leave it at that.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. You did great. I will send you a copy of the show. Please recommend us to others so we can keep the dialogue going. And thank you so much, Professor.
Well, thank you, Mark, and good luck on this project.
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Oh, those are just some comments from the people. So we got a new person. That's awesome. Hello, Rogue Analysis with Harry. Thank you for commenting, and we hope to bring more of this to you soon. Professor, I'll email you a copy of the show soon, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye-bye.